A book cut out of the Bible, found at Qumran. In the next 8 minutes, you will see what First Enoch actually says, why it exists in Aramaic among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and why the framing of cut out is more complicated than it sounds. This is not a Mystery Channel theory. First Enoch is quoted in the New Testament. Fragments of it were found at Qumran, and it remains scripture today for millions of Ethiopian Orthodox Christians. The question is not whether it existed. The question is what it says and what happened to it. Before we go any further, let's be precise. The hook says, cut out of the Bible. That framing is popular. Historically, it is a simplification, and you deserve the honest version. First Enoch was never part of most biblical canons. It remains canonical today in Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity. Everywhere else, it never achieved universal acceptance. That is the starting point. Hold that. We will come back to it. Now, what is this text? The version most widely read in the English-speaking world is the 1917 translation by R.H. Charles, a scholar of ancient texts whose work is now in the public domain. The text presents itself as visions and teachings received by Enoch, a figure referenced briefly in Genesis. First Enoch is a composite document. Scholars identify it as multiple sections assembled over time. The section we are focusing on today is called the Book of the Watchers, chapters 1 to 36. Within it is one of the oldest written accounts of beings called the Watchers, and what they did when they came down to earth. The R.H. Charles translation gives us access to the primary text. Everything factual here traces back to that translation, to Genesis, to Jude, and to the manuscript record at Qumran. Nothing else is being smuggled in. Understanding what kind of document First Enoch is matters before interpreting it. It is not a hidden gospel suppressed by a single council. It is an ancient text translated from manuscripts with a documented transmission history. That is what makes it worth examining carefully, and what makes the speculation around it possible to separate from the record. In 1947, in the Judean desert near a site called Qumran, cave discoveries began yielding some of the oldest known manuscript fragments of ancient texts. These became the Dead Sea Scrolls. According to the Israel Antiquities Authority and the Leon Levy Dead Sea Scrolls Digital Library, fragments of First Enoch in Aramaic were among the manuscripts found at Qumran. These Aramaic fragments correspond to sections of First Enoch that include the Book of the Watchers, the Watchers narrative. This is among the oldest manuscript evidence we have for this text. It places First Enoch in the hands of whatever community occupied Qumran before the Common Era. We do not know precisely who that community was. We know the text was there. Manuscript evidence matters because it separates what we can verify from what we project onto the past. The Qumran fragments tell us that First Enoch, or portions of it, was being copied and preserved in antiquity. The Israel Antiquities Authority documents this. What it does not document is intent. That gap is where theory begins, and we will clearly mark it when we get there. Here is what First Enoch actually says. Based on the R.H. Charles 1917 translation, chapters 6 and 7 describe 200 beings called the Watchers, who look down at human women and desire them. In Charles's translation, First Enoch chapter 6 reads, "And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men." The text names a leader among them, Sem-Yaza, and describes a collective oath sworn on Mount Hermon. 200 of them commit to this descent together, binding themselves to it. Chapter 7 then describes their offspring, beings the text calls giants who consume everything and eventually turn against humanity. The Watchers also teach humanity things. The text lists metalworking, enchantments, the cutting of roots. knowledge the text frames as corrupting. Now connect that to Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. Genesis states that the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive and took them as wives. Their offspring are called Nephilim, mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Genesis gives almost no detail. First Enoch expands that account extensively: names, location, specific teachings, consequences. Then there is Jude, verses 14 to 15. The New Testament letter of Jude quotes First Enoch directly. The text reads, "And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds." That is a direct quotation of 1 Enoch chapter 1, verse 9 in the Charles translation. Jude, verses 14 to 15, is in the New Testament. The text it quotes is 1 Enoch. The connection between Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4, 1 Enoch chapter 6 and 7, and Jude, verses 14 to 15, is not a theory, it is textual. The New Testament cites 1 Enoch and identifies it as prophecy of Enoch. That is what the text says. You can verify it yourself. All three sources are available to you. Why did 1 Enoch not enter most biblical canons? Here we have to be honest. There are different readings and no single clean answer. The process of canon formation was not a single event. It developed over centuries, varied by community, and was shaped by theological, political, and practical factors that scholars still debate. First Enoch did not achieve the broad acceptance across early Christian communities that other texts did. Some scholars argue that narratives about divine beings interbreeding with humans created difficulties as doctrines about angels and human nature became more defined in later centuries. Others point to the mechanics of transmission. First Enoch was preserved in Ge'ez, the liturgical language of Ethiopia, by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which kept it canonical. In most other traditions, the text circulated but was not included in final canonical lists. Whether it was actively set aside or simply never had enough support in the communities that shaped the Western canon is a question researchers answer differently. We do not have a record of a single council that reviewed First Enoch and voted to exclude it. What we have is the result: absent from most canons, present in one living tradition, evidenced in fragments at Qumran. This is a disputed area. Presenting one explanation as definitive would be inaccurate. The honest position is that canon formation is complex. The evidence is incomplete, and different scholars draw different conclusions. We will not collapse that into a simple story. What follows is interpretation, not established fact. These are theories. They are clearly marked as such. They are interesting. They are not sourced to the documents named at the start of this video. Some readers look at First Enoch's absence from Western Christian canons and propose deliberate suppression, that a narrative of divine beings physically descending, interacting with humanity, and transmitting forbidden knowledge was incompatible with theological frameworks that developed later. That is a theory. We do not have documents that show this was the reasoning behind any exclusion. Others speculate that the Qumran community preserved First Enoch precisely because they saw themselves as holding on to texts that others were setting aside. We do not know that. The text was there. Why it was there is inference. There is also a reading, our theory, not sourced, that the Nephilim narrative in First Enoch served as one answer to the theological problem of where evil originates. Later traditions developed different answers to that problem. If a community no longer needed First Enoch's answer, they may have had less reason to preserve the text. That has internal logic. It is not in the sources. Marking speculation as speculation is not a weakness. It is the only way to be useful to you. The verified record here is already striking. A text quoted in the New Testament, found in Aramaic at Qumran, describing events that parallel Genesis, canonical today in Ethiopia, absent from most other traditions. The speculation is interesting, the facts are more durable, and they raise enough questions on their own. First Enoch is an ancient text, most accessibly translated by R.H. Charles in 1917. Its Book of the Watchers describes beings called Watchers who descend to earth, swear an oath on Mount Hermon, and produce offspring the text calls giants. Aramaic fragments matching this text were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, documented by the Israel Antiquities Authority. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4 contains a parallel account. Jude, verses 14 to 15, quotes First Enoch directly and attributes it to Enoch himself. The text is canonical today in Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity. It was never universally canonical elsewhere. Why it is absent from most traditions involves disputes scholars have not resolved. What it actually says is not in dispute. You can read the Charles translation yourself. If you want to check the sources, the R.H. Charles 1917 translation of First Enoch is public domain and available online. The Dead Sea Scrolls fragments are documented through the Leon Levy Dead Sea Scrolls Digital Library via the Israel Antiquities Authority. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4, and Jude, verses 14 to 15, are in any standard Bible. The next episode in this series covers what the Watchers actually taught and what the text says that knowledge did to the world. If that interests you, you know what to do.